Welcome back. It's my privilege to welcome you all to the debate, Is the World Better with Christianity? I'll be your moderator, JT. First off, I'd like to introduce the man arguing in the affirmative. It is Eugene Curry, who is the pastor at Park Hill Baptist in Kansas City. Big warm round of applause from both sides for Mr. Curry. Come on up. And arguing in the negative, it will be Dan Barker, the co-president from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Both sides, big round of applause. All right. For the opening, we're going to begin with 10 minutes from both sides. The affirmative in debates, always open. So, Mr. Curry, if you'd like to take the podium, you have 10 minutes. Also, before he starts, I'd like to ask everybody to hold any boos, jeers, or applause until after the speaker has finished.
Then you can boo and jeer.
Oh yeah, and turn your damn cell phones off.
Well, it is my great pleasure to be here this afternoon to debate the question, is the world better with Christianity? And starting out here, I think it's very important that we remember that this is the question. Not, is Christianity true? Not even, was the world better with Christianity centuries ago? But rather, is the world better with Christianity now, today? And I think with that question in mind, the answer is yes. Obviously yes. Absolutely yes. And I'm going to be making that case this afternoon with reference to 5 points, if I can get my bulletin here to work. Hold on. Being thrown off already. All right. Health, crime, happiness, sex, and philanthropy. I'm going to be arguing that with reference to each of these 5 things, Christianity makes the world a better place. And rather than go on in the introduction, let's get started. First, there is the matter of health. Christianity is a spiritual tradition which encourages people to live healthy lives, lives in which they are in control of their appetites rather than their appetites being in control of them, whether that applies to food, to drink, to sex, to anger, or whatever. As a result, it should come as no surprise that within context wherein Christianity is far and away the predominant faith, so that religion is by and large Christian religion, religion and health positively correlate with one another. To quote Linda Waite of the University of Chicago and Evelyn Lear of the University of Illinois at Chicago, a growing body of research documents an association between religious involvement and better outcomes on a variety of physical health measures, including problems related to heart disease, stroke, hypertension, cancer, gastrointestinal disease, as well as overall health status and life expectancy. Now, when she refers to life expectancy, our two researchers here are referring to the fact that all these various benefits add up. And indeed, they add up within our context, again, a context in which religion is by and large Christian religion, to a difference of 7.6 years between our society's most religious and least religious people. That is to say that if you go to church more than once a week here in the United States, you will live on average 7.6 years longer than someone who never goes to church at all. That Christianity is helping people to live longer, healthier lives is perhaps one of the most obvious ways in which the world is better with Christianity. Second, there's the matter of crime. Christianity doesn't just encourage people to live healthy lives, but indeed holy lives. Lives committed to righteousness and that avoid wickedness. Indeed, lives which are generally law-abiding. And as such, again, it should come as no surprise that as Bradley Wright, a professor of sociology at the University of Connecticut, has found, Christians are less likely than non-Christians to be arrested, whether those non-Christians be members of other religions or non-religious altogether. And indeed, these differences in arrest rates are reflected in differences in incarceration rates. And while the United States does a rather poor job of tracking prison populations by religion, other nations do a better job. For example, the United Kingdom. And in the United Kingdom, for example, England and Wales, as of June 2012, those people who had no religion were more likely than average to be imprisoned, whereas those people who were Christian were conversely less likely than average to be imprisoned. That Christianity leads people to live more law-abiding, less criminal lives is yet one more way in which the world is better with Christianity. Fourth, there's the matter of happiness. Now, I recognize that here in this room, perhaps as a self-selected group of atheists and agnostics, open-minded it may be, You have perhaps had bad experiences with Christianity. You found it to be depressing or anxiety-producing or something like that. But if we move away from one's own personal anecdotal experience and on towards broad-based studies of the matter, one finds a rather different picture. Indeed, to quote Harold Koenig, a researcher at Duke University, doing a meta-study throughout the Western world in which, again, religion is by and large Christian religion, almost 80% of the 100 studies that have statistically examined the religion well-being relationship report a positive correlation between religiousness and greater happiness, life satisfaction, morale, or other measure of well-being. By way of contrast, while almost 80 out of the 100 studies had a positive finding, only one study was found to negatively correlate religiousness with happiness, and that study was found to have significant methodological problems, the most significant of which being that they were non-random in their approach. To give you a fun example of the kind of research I'm referring to here, let's look at Twitter. This is a more contemporary study, one not included in the meta-analysis, but still fun nonetheless. Researchers at the University of Illinois at Urbana chose to look at Twitter, and they found 5 advocates of Christianity that were relatively well-known and active on the site. They also found 5 advocates of non-belief who were relatively well-known and active on the site. They then grouped together all the Twitter followers of those 2 groups and subjected those Twitter followers' tweets to analysis, culling them for emotionally significant words. What the researchers found was that relative to one another, the Christian followers were more likely to use words like, for example, love, happy, and great, whereas the atheists were more likely to use words like bad, wrong, and awful. That Christianity is leading people to live happier lives is yet one more way in which the world is better with Christianity. Fourth, there's the matter of sex. Now, I recognize that hot, steamy sex and Christianity are not necessarily 2 things you associate in your mind. Nevertheless, when we turn our attention away again from our own kind of prejudices and towards broad-based, university-conducted, peer-reviewed research, one finds a rather different story. We could look, for example, at the National Health and Social Life Survey conducted by the University of Chicago in 1992. And what they found there was that Christians in the United States, again, the area being surveyed, were more likely to have sex often, to find it emotionally satisfying, to feel loved in the midst of it, and to find it exciting. Indeed, to look at some of the nitty-gritty findings, we can look at the example of female orgasm. Now, the researchers there at the University of Chicago asked women whether or not, when they had sex with their primary partner, do they orgasm every time? And a certain percentage of non-religious women said yes, every time. But it was also found that Christians across the board were more likely to say yes, they always orgasm every time when they have sex with their primary partner. So much so that when it comes to evangelical Protestant women, they were fully 52% more likely to always orgasm when they had sex with their primary partner than non-religious women. That religion, indeed Christian religion, is encouraging people, women, to have better sex is another way in which our world is better with Christianity. And I hope that you'll keep this in mind the next time that someone rather glibly asserts that Christianity, indeed conservative Christianity, is all about repressing women's sexuality. If that's the case, it seems that we are doing a very terrible job of it. Lastly, there is the matter of philanthropy. Jesus himself, as recorded in Matthew 25, is said to have told his followers that when the judgment comes, those people who have been kind to those in need, the imprisoned, the impoverished, the starving, the naked, the foreigner, the sick, will be received by God as if they had been kind to God himself. As such, it should come as no surprise, again, that within context in which Christianity is far and away the predominant religion, such that religion is generally Christianity, religious people are far more philanthropic than non-religious people. And that is even if one excludes from consideration giving to one's church or other overtly theological endeavors. Again, to quote the 2010 Social Capital Community Benchmark Survey conducted by Harvard University, what one finds is that religious people in the U.S., again, generally Christians, are more likely to both donate money and volunteer their time even to non-religious charities relative to their secular counterparts. We can see that even people from outside the Christian milieu looking in have recognized this as one of the particular strengths of the Christian tradition. For example, consider the words of the Dalai Lama. In providing service to the greater human community through social work, Buddhism lags far behind Christianity. Buddhists can certainly learn a great deal from Christian service. What a wonderful endorsement from somebody on the other side of a religious divide. In conclusion, we have here 5 substantive ways in which Christianity is beneficial, even when we bracket off from consideration its claims of metaphysical benefits like heaven. Generally speaking, Christianity helps people to be healthier, less criminal, happier, sexier, and more philanthropic. And given that hundreds of millions of people, indeed billions of people throughout the world, have come to embrace Christianity, that means that the world's overall levels of health, happiness, sexiness, philanthropy, and on, have been improved as a result, and that to a significant degree. Given all this, it seems clear, obvious, a slam dunk, that the world is better with Christianity. Thank you.
Next up, Den Barker, 10-minute opening.
Thank you, Eugene. Suppose I told you that I have the most beautiful garden in the world, and I want you to come over to my house and look at my garden. So you come over, look at this, and I show you, look at, there's this beautiful flower here. And you say, you're right, that's gorgeous. It's amazing. Wow. And I'm looking around, and you're looking around the rest of my garden, and I'm saying, don't look there, wait, come here, I want to show you this other, look at this flower over here. And you say, you're right, Dan. That is amazing. That's incredible. That's gorgeous. Wow. Those are beautiful flowers, but you're looking around and you're noticing that there's weeds and there's diseased plants and there's gopher holes and there's trash and there's overgrown. And I'm saying, don't pay any attention to that. Look at these few little things that are beautiful. Would you say that I have a beautiful garden? No, you would probably say, you've got some beautiful flowers, but your garden is ugly. The same is true with Christianity. Christianity indeed has some beautiful flowers. Many or most Christians are good people. Many of them have enriched the world in beautiful ways. Many of them talk about peace and love and charity and compassion. And we applaud that. In fact, many of us march in the same marches with Christians for these causes that are making the world a better place. No one denies that Christians have been good for the world. No one denies that. The question is Christianity good for the world? We could say the same thing about the Dalai Lama. We could say the same thing about Muslims. Muslims are good people. They have enriched the world through many ways. Jews, Hindus are giving, charitable, peaceful people. They have done wonderful things. But what we are doing when we say this is that what we are separating out from the religions those aspects of goodness and charity that are common to all of humanity. They are common across all the religions, which means those are not religious values. Those are human values that we're talking about. So if you want to look at what Christianity is, you don't look at those common human values that we all share. We're happy to share humanistic values with Gene and his church members. That's great. Let's work together. Let's be happy. Let's be joyful. But Christianity itself is the Bible. Christianity comes out of a book called the Bible. I'll tell you just a few little stories. It was Easter Sunday about 4 or 5 years ago in northern Wisconsin. A little girl named Kara Newman. Her parents were strong Bible-believing, good people who believed the book of James, chapter 5, that says, is any sick among you? Is any afflicted among you? Let them come before the elders and anoint the head with oil, and the prayer of faith will heal the sick. And so they did that. They said, no, let's not take her to the doctor. That would be disobeying God's powerful plan. The Bible says, all things whatsoever ye shall ask for in prayer believing, you shall receive. Is anything too hard for God? They believed Christianity. Their daughter died a horrible, needless death from easily treatable diabetes that day. She became a martyr for the faith of her parents. There are stories after stories after stories about how, not Christians, but how Christianity itself as a religion has harmed the world. My family is a Native American family. My dad's a member of the Delaware tribe. Our ancestors were on this continent at least 15,000 years ago, and now I think they're even pushing it back even further. But 15,000 years ago, which, by the way, was 9,000 years before the world was created, if you believe that. Families were loving each other, caring for each other, telling stories, exchanging myths. They had their form of health care. They had their loving families. Is Eugene going to say that before Christianity came to this continent, before the Europeans came here with a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other and the invisible disease, that the world was worse off? Tell that to the tribes that were exterminated. Tell that to Governor Winthrop of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, who got up on Thanksgiving, noticing that Massachusetts coast had been totally cleared. He didn't know it was because of disease. He got up and he thanked God for clearing the way for his true people to come onto this continent. The way Christianity has treated native cultures, indigenous cultures, the way it has pretty much driven a lot of them extinct because of the mandate to convert the world is one of the weeds in the garden. And by the way, during my rebuttal time, I'll respond to the arguments that he raised. This is my opening statement. Talking about, of course, Eugene is right, that even if Christianity was better on all these measures, it doesn't mean it's true. It would be like saying, notice how well-behaved children are during the month of December. Right? Look, you can't deny that a belief in Santa Claus has had measurable effects. So Santa Claus belief is a positive thing for the world. We're not debating that tonight, but we should make the point. If it can be shown, and I think it can be shown, that Mormons are actually healthier than any other group of Christians. The Mormons in Utah will report a healthier lifestyle, more healthy than your church. In fact, we can show that Southern Baptists have a higher divorce rate than any other group of people, than any other group of Christians. Catholics have a lower divorce rate as a group. So therefore, should we argue that Southern Baptists should be ignored and we should all become Roman Catholics because they have, by all of these measures that you can measure together. So look at some of the weeds. Look at the church's treatment of women. And by the way, the Christianity itself, in spite of the fact that most Christians today are kinder than the Bible, they're smarter than Jesus, they're better than the God of that scripture, and we applaud that. We're glad that you've risen above the brutality of that book. But the status of women through the Bible, in fact, even your own Baptist statement says on your own church website that a wife should graciously submit to her husband. That's what his church teaches. Why? Why should a wife graciously submit to her husband? Because the Bible says she should. Why? Are husbands smarter than wives? When there's an argument, does the husband always win? There is a damage there. There's a harm to women and women's rights. Atheists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had to work for a half a century for the radical notion that women should be able to vote, which was opposed by the Christian churches. The church has put roadblocks in the way of social progress, such as gay marriage, such as doctor-assisted suicide. Gay marriage is a good thing for the world, and your church opposes it. Why? Because the Bible says it's wrong. Christianity itself is causing harm. In spite of the fact that you Christians are good people, Christianity itself is causing unnecessary harm. If the Bible says homosexuality is wrong, then it's the Bible that's wrong, not homosexuality that's wrong, and yet religious teaching locks people into a mindset like the Vatican. The Vatican is too religious to care about the real world. Look at the Vatican's position on birth control, for example. The Vatican's horrible, immoral position on a woman's ability to control her own reproductive future has resulted in untold misery. That's Christianity having an effect on the world, not just for overpopulation, but for sexually transmitted diseases, for example. If the Pope would just get up and say one good thing about birth control, think how that would improve the world, but he's too religious. He's too religious to really care about human values. So the wars that have been caused, look at the 30 Years' War in Europe. You know what that was primarily about? There were at least 3 million, maybe 10 or 11 million people who were killed in that war in Europe, in the 30 Years' War. You know what it primarily started over? Confessional differences, like transubstantiation and infant baptism. Protestants and Catholics killing each other. Even though Paul said in 1 Corinthians, let there be no divisions among you, you should all think of one mind. Christianity has caused untold misery in the world. So we could go on and list a lot of the other, opposition to sex education in the schools, for example, opposition of liberalization of divorce laws, for example, which is just happening in Ireland. And the environment, a lot of believers, a lot of Christians who are opposed, they think this world is not my home, this world we live in is just a stepping stool. And if you look at the entire garden, not just a flower here and a flower there, if you look at the whole picture, we have to say, yes, many Christians have done good things for the world, but Christianity itself, as a religion coming out of the Bible, Christianity itself has been on balance more damaging and more hurtful to the world than good.
You want to check your mic real quick to make sure it's on?
Oh, we're doing this from the table here?
Yeah, from the table. Save you some exercise. You don't have to burn a calorie. This is mic 6. Here, turn it on the bottom. There's a... If that doesn't work, we have to start praying.
One. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a little red button on mine. Ask God to help you.
I got you. Oh, there you go.
There we
You're
go.
good. All right. Now Mr. Curry will have a 6-minute rebuttal. 6-minute rebuttal to Dan's opening statement.
All right. Well, Dan mentioned a lot of things that are bad things, the 30 Years' War and stuff along those lines. But as I said, this is not a debate about whether the world was better with Christianity. As I suspected, Dan has chosen to dedicate a significant portion of his time to debate and irrelevancy. Additionally, when Dan has mentioned some of the bad things that are happening today, for example, some little girl that's prevented from receiving medical treatment, he's likewise citing anecdotes, not actual data. I've cited large, broad-based studies that involve hundreds of thousands of people, and Dan is citing just fun stories, or sad stories as the case may be. I think that we recognize which of those two is more reliable. We can find anecdotes of anything. I can find anecdotes of atheists that are horrible, horrible people, but anecdotes don't really cut it. What you need are better sources of information. I hope that Dan has some significant peer-reviewed research that he's going to be presenting later on. He hasn't done so far. Nevertheless, while most of what Dan has said is irrelevant one way or another, I think it deserves to be engaged so that I don't bore you guys. He's mentioned a few things. First of all, the health of the little girl. As I said, on average, Christians in the United States have better health than non-Christians. Secondarily, he mentions how Christianity is oppressive to women. Nevertheless, speaking globally, women comprise 2/3 of all practicing Christians. If it was really as bad as Dan makes it out to be, those numbers would be difficult to explain. Further, he talks about gays, and this is an interesting point. I don't want to misrepresent myself. I'm here on behalf of Christianity. Speaking personally, I am a fairly conservative Protestant. Indeed, my denomination is the SBC, as Dan has said. And so I have my own particular views on that. Nevertheless, if I were to ask you, of the 19 different countries in the world which have legalized same-sex marriage, and I asked you to guess what percentage of those countries were countries with either a majority Christian population or at least a plurality Christian population, what would you maybe guess is the number? I mean, I can give you a hint. The number starts with a 1, ends with a 0, and it's 3 digits long. Every single country that has legalized same-sex marriage is within the broader domain of what was used to be called Christendom. Whether that be in Europe, like the Netherlands, whether it be in North America, like Mexico and the United States in certain jurisdictions, whether it be in South America, like with Argentina, whether it be in places like South Africa, every single country that has legalized same-sex marriage has been to some extent, Christian country, at least in terms of its cultural background. Now, that doesn't prove that Christianity is the thing driving this, but nevertheless, it is an interesting idea, as Damon Linker has written in The Week, in his article, How Christianity Gave Us Gay Marriage, on February 19th of 2014. The principles which are driving the campaign to legalize same-sex marriage are admittedly Christian principles. Speaking for myself, I believe that these are misapplications of Christian principles, but they are Christian principles nevertheless. He speaks about wars that have been fought. Again, yes, there have been unfortunate religious wars. Again, though, they are irrelevant to the topic of today's debate. These are wars, as Dan mentions, the 30 Years' War, centuries old. But even more to the point, religious wars, and especially Christian wars, are extremely uncommon, statistically speaking. Scott Tran, writing in Foreign Policy on August 6, 2012, wrote the article God in the Ivory Tower, in which he indicated that religion accounts for less than 7% of all the wars fought in history. And if you were to exclude, say, Islamic conflicts, or conflicts that involve Islam as the primary militant, the number drops in half. And it represents about 1% of all the war dead. Not a great thing, but again, neither an atrocious thing. Things like territory, glory, pride, and money are responsible for a great deal more conflict. Even things like democracy are responsible for a great deal more conflict. And yet I don't think anyone else would say that on that basis the world is worse with democracy because people have used it as an excuse to go to war. I'll leave it at that.
Dan Barker will now get a 6-minute rebuttal.
So you're arguing that Christianity was really bad and horrible for the world up until now. Now it's right. Ignore what happened in the past. Ignore the history. Ignore the fact that many of our culture, many of our standards stem from the past. You're arguing that today, finally, Christianity has got its act together and now it's good. Even though the fact that the Bible itself is what Christianity is based on, and the Bible says that homosexuals shall be killed. Their blood shall be upon them. And you didn't tell us what your personal views are, but your own church says that homosexuality is an illness. It's a wrong in the world. I hope you're smarter than your church and you realize the facts of science. But there's a serious problem with a lot of these surveys that you are quoting, and that is the fact that we know that Christians, especially Christians, but believers, exaggerate on surveys. There have been many surveys that show this. For example, with church attendance. Historically, about 40% of Americans regularly report that they go to church regularly. And that's a pretty big number. 40% of Americans have for decades reported that. But when you actually count the people in the pews, the studies that actually don't just take the word of the person on the telephone, but you actually count them in the pews, it comes out about 19% actually show up. Christians who respond to surveys are likely to double. And this is just common among survey taking, the tendency to over-report socially desirable things and to under-report socially undesirable things, like substance abuse among teenagers, for example. Another example is tithing. 17% of Americans report that they tithe to their church regularly, 10% of their gross or net income. I don't know if you know the figure in your own church, but they actually counted how many people actually do tithe. Even though 17% report that they tithe, only 3% actually do tithe. So when pollsters call up a Christian and say, does your Christianity make you happier? Yes, it does. I think what a lot of these surveys are actually showing is that atheists are more honest in surveys.
Remember what I said, I'll ask the audience to hold applause until after the person's finished.
Regarding health, for example, many of these surveys that show that people who go to church are healthier than those that not, especially, there was a survey in Florida where they looked at older people, and they found out that older people who regularly go to church are actually healthier than those that don't. But then someone pointed out, well, the ones that are too sick to go to church don't go to church. It's only the healthy that go to church. So it's not proving anything. It's just showing that you have to be healthy in order to go to church. Crime. If non-believers are more likely to commit crime, then why is it that in the federal prison system right now, only 0.02% of the population reports that they are atheists? The rest, 99 point whatever that is, report that they are believers. The jails are filled with people who believe in God. Atheists are not committing these crimes. Atheists can commit crimes. There are some atheists in prison, but they are greatly underrepresented in the prison system. So it's your churchgoers, your friends. You know George Barna's studies. George Barna is a born-again Christian, and you know about his research out of Santa Barbara. George Barna has written these books castigating the church for failing to do a better job. And he's the one who points out that born-again Christians have a higher divorce rate than non-Christians. Southern Baptists are at about 29%. Others are down in here. And atheists and Roman Catholics are at the bottom at 23%. Among people who have been married, about 23%. So A lot of these studies are suspect, and what are they actually showing? I think they're showing that believers believe they have better lives, and they tell pollsters that they have better lives than the non-religious. And how do you connect the dots? What you are reporting to us is what a group of people within a certain majority demographic in the country report to us. But how do you connect the dots between that and Christianity? In Japan, for example, health is very high, and crime is very low in Japan, but they're not Christians. In Japan, they are basically non-believers. But would you say, therefore, their commitment to health and well-being is due to their non-belief, or is it due to their commitment to health and well-being? So I don't think you're connecting the dots between Christianity, the religion itself, and these surveys themselves. There was a recent Gallup poll. Is my time up?
No, it was me, sorry.
Okay. There was a Gallup poll that just came out just this last month where people reported their well-being, as you were mentioning. And it is true. There were three groups of people: the very religious, the moderate religious, and the non-religious. The very religious in America report, 69% of them report well-being in their life. They're great, right? The moderate religious report, 63% of them report that they have well-being in their life. That's not a big difference, but it's a difference. They're both around 2/3 of the population. Where do you think the non-religious fell in that survey? Where would you guess? Where would you guess the non-religious fell in reporting well-being? It just came out, so you might not have seen it. 65%. The non-religious fell in at 65. So 63, 65, 69% of Americans, religious or not, are reporting lives of well-being. So maybe that is statistically significant. Maybe there is a statistician would say, yeah, there's a difference there. But combine that with the fact that we know that Christians are over-reporting. Christians are not honest in these surveys. It throws your conclusions into doubt.
Mr. Curry will now get a second rebuttal round, 6 minutes.
All right, Dan. You have stated that while I've been able to cite peer-reviewed research conducted by university-based researchers, published in mainstream academic journals, that we should ignore that because the studies are unreliable. When you hear something similar from a creationist concerning carbon dating, I doubt you're inclined to take it all that seriously. You have trust that secular researchers at mainstream major international universities can do their research well enough to screen out problems. And I'm saying that we ought to have the same kind of presumptive trust in other scientists. Not necessarily paleontologists here, but sociologists. When we look at meta-studies that involve 100 different individual studies, and we see that 80 out of the 100 give us a similar result, that should give us some good grounds for believing that the result is real and not imaginary. You mentioned the possibility of confounding variables. Maybe, like with the Japanese, people's health is attributable to other causes besides their religion. And that's certainly possible. But if you can figure that out, and I can figure that out, surely medical researchers can figure that out as well. And they've done their best to try to screen that out. And indeed, they report that they do. Going back to the Religious Involvement and Morality Meta-Analysis Review by Michael E. McCullough, published in Health Psychology back in 2000, they looked at a dozen different confounding variables, and they screened them all out, and they found that the relationship between religiousness in the United States and health outcomes is robust. It perseveres despite all the various ways you might try to explain that away. You referred to the individuals that are in prison and how so very few of them are atheists. And that's quite true. I want to be very upfront about that. There are very, very few people in the United States prison system who, when asked, what's your religion, say the word atheist. But so what? I mean, I've heard from atheists for years now that that isn't the measure of a true atheist. Self-reporting, self-identification. It's whether or not you believe in a God. And if we use that as the measure of genuine atheism and not self-identification using a particular label, then we're thrust back to those studies, as I pointed to with Britain, which are also borne out here in the United States. Those people that when asked what the religion say, no religion, are much more likely to be in prison than the average person. Now, they may not self-identify using the word atheist, but nevertheless, that people with no religion are far more likely to be in prison relative to the average, and Christians far less likely, I think is a meaningful result. And I don't think we can kind of wish it away with this kind of convenient and tragically common atheist two-step of counting it one way when you want to increase your numbers in the general population and counting it another way when you want to try to minimize those numbers in the prison population. You've also talked in your previous statement about how, again, Christianity has done some bad things and it leads to some bad outcomes for other people. And that's certainly true. If Christianity is really great for 90% of the population, that leaves 10% of the population for whom it's not so great in terms of its outcomes. But so what? I mean, let's use an example. Let's use an analogy. Think about vaccines and vaccinations. The anti-vaxxer crowd is a bunch of goofballs and nuts. But they do have a point. Vaccines do hurt some people. If you go and you vaccinate yourself for, say, yellow fever, there is a statistically real but nevertheless small chance that you will die from that vaccination. It's a dangerous vaccination. Nevertheless, while vaccines hurt some people, they help people too. And they help a lot more people than they hurt, so that on the net, they're good things. And only goofballs pretend otherwise. I think we can apply the same kind of reasoning, for example, to Christianity. Yeah, Christianity is going to hurt some people. Some people are going to get ground up by parents that have goofy beliefs, or churches that have mean-spirited ministers, or they're going to get hold of some weird idea and it's going to kind of plague them for the rest of their lives. Some people are going to get hurt. But according to the data, if we're willing to trust researchers and scientists and peer review process and all that, Christianity helps a great many more people than it hurts, so that when it comes to the net outcome, the world is better with Christianity than without it, in the same way that we are better with vaccines than without them. And when you say that I'm asking us to sort of ignore history, I'm not asking us to ignore history in some kind of contrived and self-serving way. That's the topic of today's debate. If you want to talk about history, we can do that, and I'd love to have that debate. Maybe you'll invite me back next year and we can have that debate, but that's not today's debate. And what's more, it doesn't really seem all that relevant in more general terms. I mean, we could talk about doctors. Is the world better with doctors? Well, yeah, obviously. But if you went back hundreds of years, doctors are doing bloodletting and putting leeches on people's faces and stuff like that. But does that mean that the world is somehow not better with doctors now? Of course not. We look at how things are operating now when we ask questions about the now. If we want to talk history, we can talk history, but that's a separate debate.
Now to Mr. Barker's second rebuttal round, 6 minutes.
In a northern county of Ohio, Ashtabula County, they did a very carefully controlled study of church attendance. And as I told you earlier, they found out, as they called, they did a huge statistically significant survey among people in that county. And just like the national report, about 40%, 39.5% of the people there said, yes, we go to church regularly. Not just on holidays or on weddings and that, but we regularly go to church. Then they actually counted people. They went to every single church, not only the ones that were in the phone book, but they found every single church within that county where that survey was taken. And they got pastors to tell them who showed up. And they actually counted cars in the parking lot. And they actually got the actual figure from the attendance. And it came out a little more than 19%. So, yes, on the one hand, you're right. The surveys do regularly report these things. But notice what kind of sleight of hand Eugene is doing here. He's talking about 90% versus 10. Vastly more. Well, I just showed you that on well-being, for example, it was 69, 65, and 63. Maybe that is statistically significant. And even if you could show that everybody reporting was honest and they were not exaggerating their reports, that's not 90 to 10. That's not vastly greater. That's, maybe some benefit in some areas. Like if you look at Mormon churches, I'm not saying this is true, but I think churches that eschew drinking, for example, alcohol, are going to be healthier than the churches that don't. So there's going to be less alcoholism in a church that has a doctrine that says you shouldn't drink alcohol. That makes sense not because Mormonism is good for the world. It's because avoiding or limiting your alcohol is good for the world. So you might have some Christian churches today who are teaching healthy things, not out of the Bible. Christianity is the Bible. Teaching things in spite of the Bible, better than the Bible. Well, then fine. Well, then that's great. But that's not because of Christianity. That's because of a certain group of people with a certain set of doctrines. You only quoted one Bible verse today. You didn't connect any of your major points with the Bible itself. And when I pointed out the harm of this anecdote, and it's not an anecdote, there are people all over the world who are being harmed by religion in many, many ways. That harm was directly connected to a Bible verse, to scripture verses that say, all things whatsoever ye shall ask for in prayer, believing, you shall receive. That's Christianity. Christianity says that. Your Bible says that. The prayer of faith will heal the sick. Your Bible, your Christianity says that. And that teaching has caused harm. The teaching of, the sexist teachings that come out of the Bible. You know that during the Civil War, it was the Southern churches were quoting from the Bible in order to support slavery. And even today, even with Martin Luther King Jr., is he out of bounds, or can we consider Martin Luther King part of the modern world, right? Even he complained about how most of the white churches were opposed to civil rights. It was basically the black churches. So we can see that Christian teachings themselves, based on the Bible, they have been damaging. Other things you want to bring forth, that might show statistically, assuming that Christians are honest in the reporting, are not that much of a difference. I don't think you Christians have any, on average, better lives or happier lives or more healthy lives. You're obviously committing more crimes than non-Christians. And this idea, you are. Christians are committing, as a group, as a percentage, more crimes than non-Christians. So, yeah, maybe there is a tendency in prison for good behavior for an atheist to lie and say, yeah, I believe in God. Maybe that's true, but how do you quantify it? What studies have you done that show to what degree? I actually show studies that show to what degree believers are exaggerating on their tithing and on their church attendance and other things. So if you're going to quote studies, show us the studies that show that atheists, in fact, are over-reporting or under-reporting certain things. So, as I said earlier, there are some beautiful flowers in the garden, and most of us atheists are happy with most modern Christians on many issues. Although we're unhappy with the position of your church, for example, opposing gay marriage, and telling wives that they must graciously submit to their husbands. What if it's an abusive husband? What if the husband is abusing his wife? In fact, we heard a story today from Sarah, who stayed way too long in a Christian marriage because the Bible and her church told her that she should. That is a harm. So let's look at the good that Christianity and Christians have done, but let's compare it with the evils that have been done. And on balance is what we're talking about. On balance, we have to say that the bad outweighs the good.
All right, we're now into the cross-examination. Each speaker will get to ask 2 questions of their opponent, 1 minute for the questions, 2 minutes for the answer. It's been agreed that Dan will ask the first question and that Mr. Curry will ask the last.
Should a wife always submit graciously to her husband? Is that a good teaching?
No.
So you disagree with your own confession from your own church then?
I don't believe that the confession was meant to be in a kind of universalistic and airtight way.
So you disagree with that statement in your own confession that says, as the Bible says, it says very clearly in Ephesians, wives, submit yourselves to your husband, keep silent in church. If you want to learn anything, go home and learn from your husband. So you are happy to disagree with the basic teachings of Christianity because you as a modern-day Christian have risen above that. Is that what you're saying? You're disagreeing with the Bible?
No, not at all.
Before you answer, Mr. Curry, Dan, I'm going to cut you off right there so he has time to answer and
Sure.
so it doesn't turn into a debate.
Yeah, Dan, you're doing what you often do in debates. You are employing that same fundamentalist mentality that you had growing up, now in an atheistic context. Statements don't necessarily need to be taken in a rigidly wooden way. Statements can have a variety of kind of flexibility to it. And while I would certainly say that as a general rule, marriages are better when there is an element of leadership that's exercised by the husband, and I recognize that that may be a controversial statement in this context, I do not believe, and I do not think that the SBC or even Scripture believes, that that is meant to be taken as an inviolable rule, such that For example, if a husband told his wife to blaspheme God and murder her children, she'd be seen as sinning if she chose not to follow the directive.
Okay, and I will remind the speakers, if you want to rebut their answer, you're free to do so in your closing statement. Now, Mr. Curry, a 1-minute question for Mr. Barker.
All right. Dan, you began by saying that the statistics I cited were not reliable. You then proceeded to say not only were they not reliable, but they actually were the opposite of the truth, and that we can know that somehow or other. How do you know that? I mean, it's one thing to say that statistics are unreliable. It's another thing to say that they are anti-reliable.
I did not say they were anti-reliable. I said that we have shown that there's a tendency for believers, well, for all human beings, to exaggerate to pollsters, to survey takers, on the phone or however it's being taken. There is that tendency, and we can't deny that. Statisticians and surveyors know that young people underreport substance abuse, for example, because it's socially undesirable. So I wasn't saying that we can just plug that into the equation. What I was saying is there are studies that show, and I have it here, I have to look it up, but actual research where the reports that people have given in surveys, that, for example, that 40% report of church attendance, actually don't match empirically with the real world. So you can have a study that says, here's what people report, right? But surveyors know that actual reporting doesn't actually match the real world. It's either too high or too low in some way. So I was pointing out that empirical research showed that Christians were, in fact, doubling their report of church attendance, which means that if that holds, that it's only half that are reporting it. That means that on any given non-holiday weekend, 4 out of 5 Americans are not in church. Do you happen to know what percentage of your church tithes?
The question,
no. I mean, it's just rhetorical. You probably don't. But when they actually look at churches, look at the ones that they're allowed to look at, it's about 3%, even though 17% say they do. So I'm basing my conclusions on actual empirical data, not on survey data.
Okay. Dan Barker, 1-minute question for Mr. Curry.
Let me find my place here.
Before you do, I should apologize. I keep calling him Dan Barker and Mr. Curry. I know Dan, so it's force of habit, but I'll try to be better as a moderator.
I feel disrespected, you know?
Atheist, no moral compass.
Well, then I guess I would just ask kind of a quick question. I'm sure you're familiar with George Barna and his research. He's written a lot of books, The Second Coming of the Church, for example, in which he admits, as a born-again Christian, as a sociologist himself, he admits that we as a church are not cutting it. We have higher divorce rate. We have higher crime. We have less reported happiness, is what he finds in his surveys. So what do you say to the fact that born-again Christian sociologists are agreeing that Christians really are not any better? In many cases, they are worse off. What do you say to George Barna?
Yeah, I think that George Barna should stop being Chicken Little. There is, as you said, a human tendency to skew results to some extent. And I don't think that George Barna is skewing his results. I think that he's accurately reporting what he has to say. But he is carefully selecting the data that he conveys. So he's not dishonest, but he's selective.
How do you know that?
Because, according to Bradley R. E. Wright, a sociologist at the University of Connecticut, reviewing this kind of literature has found that while it may be true that self-identified Christians have, for example, worse divorce rates than self-identified atheists, if one actually looks at people who are living or walking the talk, people who are going to church on Sunday, maybe even doubling the fake attendance, the numbers reverse themselves. Those people who actually bother to live out their faith in even the most minimalistic of ways relative to church attendance, they suddenly have much better marriage rates relative to those who have no religion.
I have to wait to respond.
Yeah, in your closing, please, Mr. Barker. Mr. Barker. Mr. Curry, you have one last question for Mr. Barker.
Yeah, Dan, you've mentioned that there's this doubling effect on reported church attendance and things like that. And you've put it forward as if this were a problem for me and not for you. But how can that be the case if the implication of that is if, according to surveys, attending church twice a week leads to a 7.6-year increase in lifespan, it seems that you're saying that that's a possibility only with once-a-week attendance.
Well, I did throw some question upon the church attendance and health studies, and I do have it here. It's a study out of Florida, which shows that people who are sick can't get to church. People who are less healthy, especially among the elderly, that skews the numbers. Obviously, if you're too sick to go to church, you're not going to be counted as a healthy churchgoer. So, in my way of thinking, you seem to be using the no true Scotsman fallacy. It's only the ones who are actually healthy that we're going to count. We're not going to count the ones who are not healthy, who don't show up in church. So, it makes sense that people who live in a certain culture where they're likely to get up and go to any event, let's say, are going to be healthy people. So, again, that doesn't touch on whether Christianity is true or not. And I guess during closing I will ask you, how do you connect the dots? How do you connect the dots between that and actual Christian teachings from the Bible?
All right. We'll now move into closing arguments, 6 minutes. The first will be Mr. Curry.
From the left.
Wherever you're most comfortable.
Well, I'm halfway here already, so. All right, at the end of this, I'd like to summarize some of the flow of our debate today. At the beginning, I stated that I wanted to lay out 5 ways in which Christianity is making the world a better place, ways in which the world is better with Christianity. And I mentioned health, I mentioned crime rates, I mentioned happiness, sex, and philanthropy. Now, in support of these claims, I presented data derived from scientific studies conducted by university-based experts and published in mainstream peer-reviewed academic journals. And while Dan has said quite a lot this afternoon, most of it wasn't really all that germane. Much of it was about a topic which is not the topic of today's debate, about the past as opposed to the present, and some of it was even factually inaccurate, as I've tried to point out on several occasions now. Now, Dan may be willing to look at the data that I've presented and to simply wave it away, to simply say, no, it can't be that way. Studies show 80 out of 100 times that Christian religiosity is connected to happiness. I don't buy it. Studies have shown that self-identified Christians claim to have better sex. I don't buy it. Studies claim to show Christians are less criminal. I don't buy it. Now, of course, Dan is free to employ these arguments from personal incredulity all he likes, but they're kind of crummy as far as arguments go. As a result, my case still stands. Given that Dan has said very little that actually attacks the substance of what I've said, apart from conspiracy theories and kind of vague beliefs that Christians are over-reporting in ways that atheists aren't without really any data to support that conclusion, it does really seem that the world is better with Christianity. Much, much better. That people in the UK who are Christians are far less likely to be committing crimes is a wonderful thing. That the same thing is reflected in the United States is a wonderful thing. That Christians are more likely to be philanthropic is a wonderful thing. That people can live 7.6 years longer, apparently even going to church half of twice a week, just once a week, is a wonderful thing. These are all ways in which Christianity makes the world better. Now, Dan has also said that I have discussed here the statistics related to Christians and not necessarily the Bible. And he's frustrated by that. He wants to equate the Bible simpliciter, the Bible itself, with Christianity. Christianity is the Bible and vice versa. Now, there's a part of me as an evangelical Protestant that wants to give Dan a high five. Woo! Sola Scriptura! But I have to admit that while I see it to some extent that way, most Christians don't. Most Christians do not affirm sola scriptura. And so for Dan to try to approach this debate as if the Bible and Christianity are identical things is to miss the boat. Dan and I, coming from kind of fundamentalist backgrounds, love that idea. Christians generally do not affirm it and do not support it. Now, while I said that this debate was not about the truth of Christianity, and I affirm that, it seems that both Dan and I want to say something about that topic here at the end. When we as human beings evaluate the truth claims of certain propositions, and those propositions are not obviously true or obviously false, our evaluations can be influenced by a variety of subtle factors. And a desire that the thing in question be true or not true can be one of those subtle factors. If we really, really, really want something to not be true, when we evaluate its truth, we can perhaps do so in ways that are somewhat prejudicial. We can set the evidential bar so high as to be unreasonable and essentially unmeetable. And if in times past, when you have considered the truth claims of Christianity, you felt that it was a bad thing, that the world was worse with Christianity, it may have been that you evaluated its truth claims in that prejudicial manner. If instead, now you have perhaps been disillusioned by this debate, if, unlike Dan, you are willing to defer to the peer-reviewed findings of social scientists at major universities throughout the world, and you are willing to see that Christianity does indeed positively correlate with positive things, perhaps not as the ultimate cause, but it nevertheless being in the causal chain, perhaps it's time for you to reconsider those truth claims. Perhaps if you were to reevaluate the truth claims of Christianity, you would come now without the bias, without the animus, without the prejudice to different conclusions. Maybe not. Maybe you'll reevaluate them and you'll come to the exact same conclusion. Perhaps you'll come to conclude that in the end, even with it being really nice, Christianity is still false. So be it. But maybe not. Maybe you'll see it in a different light. Maybe you will come to the end of your investigations and you will conclude that instead it is more likely that Christianity is true than that it is false. And if that is the case, if you do ultimately come to that decision reconsidering Christianity, then on behalf of the hundreds of millions of people in the U.S. and the couple of billion people worldwide who have chosen to live in the light of the gospel to embrace Christianity, allow me to invite you to join us. Take hold of that longer, happier, healthier, more philanthropic, less criminal, and sexier life that could be yours as a Christian. Thank you.
Six-minute close for Mr. Barker.
People who are drunk will tell you they are happier when they're drunk than when they're not. They will, won't they? How many of you have been drunk and you've been happier when you're drunk? Therefore, should we all get drunk so we can be happy? Oh. That's what Eugene is asking you to do, to sacrifice your reason and your moral principles to embrace a brutal Bible that devalues women and devalues children and commits genocide and who says that his feet need to be kissed because he's the glorified master of all, and unless we worship on a certain day of the week, we all have to be stoned to death. And if you're gay, you have to have your blood upon you. Let's all just sacrifice our moral principles and our rational principles about whether God exists or not and say, hey, those people are happy people and they have better sex, so I guess I'm going to join them, right? So if you want to do that, it's a free country. By the way, I finally found my list of studies here, and there's a whole bunch of peer-reviewed studies. Here's one of them, Kirk Hathaway and Penny Marler in Church Attendance Studies, a peer-reviewed study that showed that, in fact, Christians over-report on these surveys. And there's a bunch more I could read here from, but we're past that point in the break. But notice that what Eugene did not do is he did not connect any dots between the behavior of these people and the Christianity itself. He only quoted one Bible verse. Did you notice that? Whereas in my supposed anecdotes, I quoted a number of Bible verses to show to you that Christianity has caused harm within the world. So I guess I have two basic questions about this whole debate. What does the word is mean? Is Christianity better for the world? Where are you drawing the line? Is it just from last week? Or is it just from what? The Civil Rights Movement? Or is it from Martin Luther? Or is it from, where are you drawing it? Shouldn't it have been from Jesus? Shouldn't it have been from the beginning of Christianity itself? Is Christianity good for the world? And if we take that word is and encompass all of Christianity, I was not under the impression that we were just debating the last couple of weeks within the Christian history. We're debating the entire system of Christianity. There's no question that Christianity has caused immense harm in the world for many different reasons. But my argument is not personal incredulity. There are studies that do show that Christians exaggerate. And if you're going to deny these peer-reviewed studies, some that I quoted, and you're going to say that, well, they counted 19% in church, but there were actually twice as many. They were hiding under the pew somewhere. Then you've got to show that, right? So the church, Christianity itself, has a history, and maybe it is improving somewhat. I think I'll grant you that. I think Christianity is rising above itself to some degree. I think most modern Christians, like you, are just good, decent people. You're probably a good family man, and you're a good man, and you're charitable. I think today, Christians have learned from the social progress, from the humanistic values and the advances that we've made with women's rights and with equality and with democracy. You won't find any democracy in the Bible anywhere. Democracy is an anti-Christian concept. You won't find any recognition in the Bible that human beings deserve to be treated with fairness and humanity. In the Bible, in Christianity that your book comes from, humans are worms and sinners, and we are rotten, and God is great. So you first have to define what you mean by Christianity. If by Christianity you mean only that small group of healthy people who are honest in surveys, well, then there you go. But I think you're limiting your definition of Christianity. I don't know what you think about the Roman Catholics' position on birth control, for example. That is a huge blight to the world. I would say that the Vatican's position on birth control is a huge moral evil directly attributed to Christianity itself. So yeah, let's look at the pretty flowers. Wow, you have a great sex life. Wow, that's a beautiful flower within Christianity. I'm sure you're not going to invite me to your house to look at your garden, but don't just turn your head away from the social ills that your religion has created in the world. To my tribal ancestors, to indigenous peoples all over the place, to women's rights. Women are still making, what, 76 cents on the dollar? Because of Christian teaching, because of the revealed religion's teaching that women are second class. A woman should not submit graciously to her husband. She should not. That's a bad teaching. And I'm glad to see that you're waffling on your own mission statement. Your webpage says very clearly, a woman shall. And it quotes Bible verses to prove that. I'm glad to see that you're getting smarter than Jesus was, and that you're getting and kinder than Jesus was. So, yes, Christians have done very good things for the world. So have Jews and Muslims and Hindus and atheists. We've done good human things for the world in many ways. But on balance, if you look at the effects and not just single out 5 little things where there's a possibly statistically significant improvement in one particular area or another, if you look at on balance over the entire history and in the entire breadth of Christianity, on balance it's an ugly garden. And Christianity, we don't need it. We can do without it. The world is better without Christianity.
All right, one more big round of applause for both of our presenters. We'll now move on to the Q&A. What I would ask people to do, if you have a question for Mr. Curry, please line up in this aisle. And if you have a question for Mr. Barker, please line up in this aisle. Looks like Dan's going to have an easy time of it. Share the mic, please. Here you go. And if you two want to shake hands or something, or a big sloppy kiss before we move on, go nuts. All right.
First of all, I would like to thank you for coming here. You're very brave for being here, and we really do appreciate it. In any good debate, you have to weigh a cost-benefit analysis. And throughout your kind of contingencies, you stated a lot of benefits to Christianity, whereas Dan stated a lot of costs to Christianity. And as far as statistical numbers, yes, it may be the 90 to 10. But what I'm asking is the 90 to 10, say there's 90 cases of philanthropy, and there's 10 cases of 44% of teenagers are kicked out of their homes whenever they come out of the closet to their parents. Don't you think that those costs outweigh the 90 benefits of 10% tithing to a local charity?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that that's an excellent argument. I kind of wish it had been the argument that I heard from the other side today. It's a difficult thing to assess because I don't have the data. I mean, you're right. I mean, let's say that 90% of people are made 1% better by Christianity and 10% of people are made 10,000 times worse by it. That would certainly throw off the balance. And because I don't have a lot of statistics for that, I can't say a whole lot. But on the issue that you brought up concerning homosexuality and its reception, I do think that it is significant that the only countries in the whole world which seem to be willing to grant same-sex marriage legal recognition are those that are within Christendom. And they're not contained just in Europe or just in North America, but throughout the whole world. So I think that Damon Linker has a point, that there is something about the Christian moral perspective which can be leveraged, at least. I don't think that it's necessarily an appropriate application, but it can be easily leveraged to extend to homosexual persons in connection with the idea of marriage. I mean, when Jesus says you should help those who are the least of these, and a society sees people being maligned and abused, within a Christian context, that's going to very easily kind of bring them into that orbit of kinder behavior towards them, at least macroscopically.
Can I follow up just quickly? No. No? Oh.
Well, please keep it quick, though.
So, just quickly, yes or no, are you saying that you agree with me then, Eugene, that the Bible was wrong to say that homosexuality shall be killed?
All right, this is getting into a different format here, but
I think this is the last time I'm going to allow this.
I think it's a prejudicial way to frame the question. I don't think.
The Bible says they shall be killed. Is that right?
Yeah, but the Bible also says you can't eat shellfish, but Jesus says that those kinds of laws don't necessarily apply in the new context.
So the Bible's wrong.
It's not that it's wrong, it's just that I think those statements apply within a very certain and limited geographic and temporal scope, which the New Testament is very explicitly declared to no longer apply.
Right, I'm gonna cut you off there, and we're gonna do no more follow-ups from the other side and questions, just to keep it on the up and up.
Thank you.
Not leaving my hand.
Oh, sorry. But I want to touch it. So I felt bad. Like I thought there was going to be nobody in this. So I wanted to play devil's advocate, Mr. Barker. You made what seemed like a very important distinction between the behavior of Christians and Christianity itself in terms of Christian doctrine. You also brought up, though, the mistreatment of your ancestors, the Native Americans, by Christian settlers. Is there a can you paint the picture for why that's not just the behavior of Christians, but a product of Christianity, Christian doctrine itself?
Well, under Christian teaching, the whole world should be converted to Christianity. And anyone who's not Christian is an outsider, is damned, is a savage, or whatever you want to call it. They are not full persons, human beings. So there's a Christian imperative to missionize, to convert. And we all see the tragic effects of Christian missionaries, Roman Catholic and Protestant as well, totally raping and destroying indigenous cultures because they had a teaching from the Bible that tells them that these people, without Christianity, are bad and are going to go to hell. So you can see a direct connection between the teachings of Christianity itself and the horrible effects in the real world.
Do I get to respond to that?
No. No more. We're just going to stick with answers for the time being so it doesn't drag on.
All right. Somebody asked me a question like that.
Okay.
So, in spite of my secular bias, I found your presentation to be very impressive.
Well, thank you.
I particularly liked what you said about the anti-vaxxers. I completely agree with you in that, the percentages are wrong, but say 98% of the vaccination is good, maybe 2% has complications, but it would be silly to scrap the positive, because of that small negative. So I'm wondering if we could apply that same kind of thinking to not necessarily religion, but the aspects you argued for that were positive that came out of religion. Say you referenced a lot of studies and meta-studies. Say as those studies evolve, I hate to say that word, say as those studies continue, that we find that some of those benefits are not necessarily from the teachings of the Bible, but say maybe the community or shared experiences. We're social animals, just the kind of group, kind of just I don't know, community that comes out of that kind of breeds those positives. If that's shown to be the case, much like the anti-vaxxer 98-2 argument, would you be willing to throw away the 2% that I thought in your presentation you kind of conceded was bad, like the women's rights and stem cells and birth control? Would you be willing to kind of contradict the Bible and say that, hey, these are the things that make us be 69% instead of the 65% of the non-religious, focus only on them and scrap the rest?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question. While the debate tonight wasn't about the truth of Christianity, because I do accept the truth of Christianity, I'm committed to the theology. I mean, I think that the theology is correct, and I'm thrilled that Christianity enables me to make the case I made tonight because it also has social benefits. But the social benefits, in my mind, are kind of a nice side effect of Christianity. So even if the side effect wasn't there, while I'd have to let go of that argument and perhaps concede, if as these studies progress, it turns out that really, sex gets worse with Christianity or something like that, I'd have to let go of that argument. But I wouldn't thereby let go of Christianity. I'd have to have arguments that engage the truth claims of Christianity and show them to be false for me to do that.
Mr. Barker, what are some of the more significant empirical studies that you found that you might have prepared today that don't fall prey to what you think is the same problems that Eugene's studies have had?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the whole question.
What are some of the more significant empirical studies that you've prepared that don't fall prey to the problems that you think Eugene's studies that he's prepared to fall prey to?
I only brought rebuttals to the things that he raised. So what he raised are studies that are based upon surveys that are self-reported responses. So I brought studies, for example, that Ashtabula one that show that, in fact, empirically, the reliability of the reports of these surveys is questioned because there is a tendency to exaggerate. Do you want me to read down through a whole list of these or what? Well, no, I don't want to read through. I only brought them on church attendance and on tithing. I mean, that's all I brought today. I mean, we could dig around. Somebody go online and find some others.
Thank you again for coming. You did an amazing job. One of the things I miss about Christianity as an agnostic is that it was a great excuse to meet together once or twice a week with nice, moral people and talk and hang out. And I do that now in a secular manner. So I wonder, what is the incremental benefit to getting together once or twice a week with nice, moral people who are Christians rather than just meeting together once or twice a week with moral people that aren't Christians?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I have to admit that I cannot exclude the possibility that some of Christianity's health benefits derive from the social aspect. I'm not necessarily claiming that affirming the Apostles' Creed has some sort of magical power on my cells to make them live longer. It may be that Christianity leads people to go to church, and going to church just for the social benefits leads to better health. That's entirely possible. But even if that is possible, that does mean that Christianity is not just correlated, it is part of that causal chain leading to better health outcomes. Nevertheless, I would say that there are studies that indicate that even independent of the social aspects, Christianity has health benefits. To quote from Hughes, Helm, and his associates in their study, Does Private Religious Activity Prolong Survival? In the Journal of Gerontology, Medical Sciences. They said that even private religious activity leads to better health outcomes. So even things like prayer and Bible study amongst reasonably healthy older people, they're screening out, as Dan would want, the bedridden and people that are already at death's door, and so they can't get to that Bible study, so they're being screened up from consideration in an unfair way. Even when you look at people that are reasonably healthy and they're older and they're just looking at private religious practice like prayer and Bible study, it does lead to some, admittedly more modest health benefits.
Mr. Barker, your argument in regards to the studies and the significance of the studies and how Christians tend to over-embellish, during your rebuttal or your conversation about it, you said it as the same that is in fact a human aspect and not necessarily a Christian aspect to over-report the more positive things in life. So when Mr. Curry represents, 80 out of 100 individual independent studies that show that Christianity is in fact, better when it comes to health or whatever the subject matter may be, what's it to say that the atheists that are surveyed are not also over-reporting and embellishing? And is it not true that atheists and Christians would not over-embellish the fact of whether or not they're a Christian or whether they're an atheist? We can determine that those two individuals are, those two sets, I guess you would say in the study, are in fact different, but when comparatively, there's nothing really that says that Christians over-embellish more than any other group. It's just that it's a human nature.
I don't know if there have been any studies to examine that exact question. I think all sociologists would tell you that they know that studies are suspect because of the problems in honesty and self-reporting. Whatever, all of that is true. I would only posit that generally people who are part of a religion have more of a rah-rah mentality towards their religion to prove that we Presbyterians or we Jews or we whatever, yes, our religion makes us better. But I think in general, very few atheists have that kind of a feeling of a rah-rah because they're not religious. They don't have a religion. They're not trying to show the world that my First Atheist Church of Nashville is better than anyone. So I'm just guessing, and there needs to be some work here, but we do know that religious belief does compromise people's judgment. It compromises moral judgment. For other reasons, we know that. And so I would suspect that there probably is a higher tendency among church-goers to cheerlead for their religion than there is among atheists to cheerlead for atheism. But that's about the best I can answer that question.
So I want to ask why there's so much difference in self-report between church people and atheists in general. And I'll just give you a great illustration. I masturbate. Do you masturbate?
I'm going to plead the fifth.
Okay. How many of you masturbate? When I go to a church or any kind of group like that, I ask that question, almost no hands go up. Why would Christians underreport their masturbatory behavior when we know 93% of men and probably 70% of women masturbate on a very regular basis? Can you explain the difference between the church people and what we just saw here in this group?
Yeah, I guess I'd probably point to a couple of factors. One is what we saw here in this group. We have a lot of college students that enjoy saying salacious things. Church populations tend to be a little on the older side and tend to be a little more restrained and reserved and not as enthusiastic about shocking their neighbors. So that'd be a big part of it. I also think that because atheism does not have the specific moral tradition that Christianity generally inherits, at least in a broad sense, masturbation is not seen as morally problematic, and therefore people are more inclined to boldly trumpet their pastimes than the religious who might feel a little embarrassed and a little guilty about it. So I think that those are probably two independent reasons.
I hope you'll stay tonight to hear my talk on Did Jesus Masturbate?
Mr. Barker, you make a distinction between humanist values and Christian values, that just being a good person, doing charitable work is a human value, and you cite religious wars as being a Christian problem. How do you know these weren't Christian people using Christian scripture to perform the human weaknesses of gaining power over other people?
Yeah, they were. Christianity was a component of some of those wars. It wasn't the whole thing. The 30 Years' War wasn't entirely about infant baptism. It was Protestants and Catholics fighting each other, basically killing each other, millions of each other, over originally confessional differences, although the war itself grew into all sorts of other things. That's human nature. By the way, Eugene's previous answer basically proves the point. The point wasn't whether Christians are any different in their sexual life, is whether their willingness to report it. This group was willing to report something that you were unwilling to report. So when a pollster calls you up and asks you a question, you're showing us that there is a reluctance for you and for some believers to over or under report certain things. But my whole point was that if you're looking at the world, at all the different religions, there's Christianity in all of its flavors, disagreeing with Paul, who said you should all be of one mind, who killing each other. And there's Hindus and there's Buddhists, and Buddhists have had their violence as well. But when you look at all the religions or moral philosophies of the world, and you're going to choose which ones are good, you're going to pick things like peace, love, joy, compassion, charity. Those are the values you're going to pick to say, yeah, that's a good religion. No, that's a bad one. That's good. The criteria by which we judge the religions transcend the religions. And those transcendent values are human values. And since they're common to all religions, so Christianity says, peace on earth. Wow, here's a religion that talks about peace on earth. Well, they all do, in spite of the fact that Jesus said, think not that I am come to send peace. I came not to send peace, but a sword. So my point is that those values that are common to all religions that we applaud, that Eugene, the good values that he has in his life, are not Christian values. Christian values are things like what day of the week you should worship, how women should dress, what kind of language you should make, what kind of food you should eat, or the values that are unique to the religion itself, that separate it from the common human values that we all have. Those values are not good values. Those are divisive, and they start wars.
I will announce we have about 8 minutes of Q&A left, so might not get to you. Sorry.
I'm assuming as a person who enjoys a good peer-reviewed study that you have as much absolute trust in the theory of evolution as I do. And operating under that assumption, the kinds of components that go into morality, such as fairness and empathy, have been proven to show up in humans and other animals as a product of evolution and as a necessity for survival. So when those kinds of things come from our innate instincts, more or less, and when the positives that come out of religion, like community, for example, are also things that can come from a completely secular place, while Christianity can be used to justify morally abhorrent things. Why then should we continue to use Christianity when those fundamentals are already in our DNA and we already behave in a way that is not necessary for religion to take place there?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It seems like a two-parter, though, and let me try to hit both sides of it. Why should we continue to use it? I mean, I would ultimately make the case that people should embrace Christianity regardless of whether it's beneficial socially, but because it's true. But that wasn't the topic of today's debate. So if we're going to talk about, the benefits of it and so on and so forth, vis-a-vis perhaps our innate moral dispositions, perhaps attributable in some sense to an evolutionary history, I think that I would agree that it is the case that human beings generally have moral awareness, that these things, we might explain them differently, how exactly they got there, but I would agree that human beings, Christian or not, recognize moral truths when they see it, at least when they're really obvious. Nevertheless, I would say that Christianity still has a positive influence on morality, and I'd use the analogy of running. I mean, everybody that's healthy enough can run, but those people who really practice at it run better. And I would say that those people, every person has the ability to recognize moral truth and to live in a moral way, but Christianity seems to encourage people to practice at it a little more than if they didn't have any religious ideology whatsoever, or even perhaps other religious ideologies. I would point to the example, several years back, there was that kid from the U.S., or I think it was the U.S., who was over in Singapore. He graffitied some cars and got caned for it. It was kind of a big to-do. The media in the West went crazy over this, and they interviewed the founding prime minister of the Republic of Singapore, a man named Lee Kuan Yew, and he reported, he said, to us in Asia, and he was referring to kind of his Taoist, Confucian, Buddhist background, the individual is an ant. To you in the West, generally the Christian West, he's a child of God. It's a remarkable concept. And we see there a clash of moral vision, which, while perhaps agreeing on obvious things, you can't torture babies because you love it, nevertheless have differences of opinion about how individuals can be treated that are attributable to the Christian moral perspective, such that Nietzsche, in his book The Will to Power, wrote that Christianity wants it so that no one can be sacrificed. And he was outraged by that because he wanted the weak to be sacrificial, to be expendable for the strong. And Christianity, in his opinion, put its foot down and said no, that each individual has value of his own.
We have 5 minutes left for Q&A, so I'm going to take this question, that question, and then one more for Mr. Barker, so we're even. So you two, I'm sorry, you are the weakest link. But I'm also going to ask people to kind of hurry it up so we can squeeze this into the 5 minutes.
Great. Yeah, Mr. Barker, feel free to answer this in the context of overall history and recent history. I don't want you to feel restricted. Do you feel that Christianity impedes the progress of science or not?
On balance, Christianity has more often impeded the progress of science than not. Although there have been some wonderful scientists who were Christians, just like there were wonderful scientists who were Muslims, it doesn't follow that you connect the dots between their science and their religion. So today, in general, especially the more conservative revealed religions, there's a resistance to scientific progress. There's a resistance in the conservative religious right to global warming, stem cell research, birth control, to all sorts of scientific progress because it conflicts with what the Bible teaches, and that's the problem. Christianity is based on the Bible. We do know that Christianity, and one reason why you should not be a Christian, Eugene, is because it's not true. You brought it up. You said you would still embrace it because it's true. We know that Christianity is a false religion. Its teachings are false. The Bible is contradictory, and it's unhistorical and anachronistic and unscientific in many of its ways. And even it's immoral. And you talk about torturing babies for fun. The Bible says very clearly, the book that you have in your church says very clearly, happy shall he be who takes and dashes the little ones against the stones. The Bible doesn't say you should regrettably sometimes have to kill children in wartime. It says you should be happy to do that. It's an immoral book, too, besides being an untrue book. But I think generally we can see that most scientific progress has had to fight Christianity ever since, since the Dark Ages and then with the Enlightenment. And we can see that there's been a resistance. If anything goes against what the Bible actually says, then the church tries to squelch that. So in general, I think your question is answered with a yes, although there are some exceptions. There were some wonderful Christians who were scientists.
And please do try to keep it quick.
Yeah, I'll keep this quick. Mr. Curry, you're a great speaker. I just want to say that. My point I wanted to make is I would say that all those good things that you did mention that Christianity has provided, I would say it's in spite of Christianity that we have all those things. If you look at the height of Christianity during the Middle Ages, after that, after the schism of the church, basically Christianity has been on the decline since then, and from that we got the Enlightenment.
Can we get to a question?
Yeah. Industrial Revolution, modern society as we know today. I would just say, as you see the power of the church dwindling, you see things in life getting better, and as the church seems like it is trying to catch up with all of this. So it has no set principles. It's just trying to,
Is there a question here?
Yes. Can you? Basically, what do you think about the relationship of the decline of the church and as, I guess, the human condition getting better as the church declines?
Yeah, I guess I would dispute that the influence of the church has declined. More people today are affiliated with a church in the United States than ever before in its history. We can point to certain counterexamples, obviously. There are parts of Scandinavia where people are a little less plugged into churches and stuff like that. But to say that the church has been declining ever since 1054 when the church schismed, I think it's just historically naive. The church was extraordinarily powerful in the 15th century. Dan talks about how science is being resisted by Christianity, and yet, embarrassingly for his side, it was Christendom that kind of gave us modern science. And if there's something which is uniquely anti-science about Christianity, that it was uniquely the thing that gave us science is kind of inexplicable. And I would say that when you talk about the decline of Christianity, I think you're also using a somewhat ethnocentric perspective. Christianity has increased tenfold in Africa in the last 100 years. That you're just looking at Europe is understandable given our own backgrounds, perhaps, but it's nevertheless erroneous.
Last question of the night. Please keep it snappy.
Snappy. Mr. Curry, I honor your skill.
Is this a question for Mr. Curry or Mr. Barker? It's not. No, it's not a comment and answer section. Sorry.
I'm the oldest person here, perhaps, and masturbation for me is joyful and not salacious.
All right. Now, before we get to the last round of applause, I'm not going to admit I masturbate if that's what you're thinking. I would like to remind everybody that at the Soma table in the other room, you can still submit questions for the student interfaith panel later. Get yourself a free shirt. Get yourself into another raffle for more gift cards. So please be sure to do that because free stuff rules. And on that note, Ed Brayton will be the next speaker at 3:30. And please, one more big round of applause for both our debaters.
Oh, this was fun. A lot of fun.
This is my first time. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, cool. Well, you're very smooth, sir.